Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our educational webinar with Athlete Soul. My name is Miriam Glaze. I am the founder of Athlete Soul. I want to take a couple of minutes to get everybody here in the webinar. And while we do that, I'm going to give you some information about today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about sports nutrition with Lauren Link, and she'll introduce herself in a minute. Before that, just wanted to let you know that this event is recorded. You will have it available on our website after the event, and we'll be sharing with you the recording as well, so you can refer to it. In addition to that, we will also share this presentation from Lauren and her contact information also via email. The outline of this event, we're going to start with a presentation from Lauren for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll follow up with question and answers. So if you would like to ask some question, it would be great that you do so in the either the question and answer box or the chat box in your screen down there. And then at the end of her presentation, I will be asking her the question so we can have a little bit of an interaction there. Other than that, we will talk a little bit about some of the other Athlete Soul events that we have going on in the next few weeks. But right now, I'm passing it on to Lauren. Lauren, thank you for joining us, and I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself.
Cool, thank you. All right, well, I will jump right into it. My name is Lauren Link. I'm the Director of Sports Nutrition at Purdue University, and figured I'd give you a quick little intro about myself. I was also an athlete. I played, well, I went to Purdue. I did a double major in dietetics and nutrition, fitness, and health, and then got my master's in health and kinesiology also from Purdue. And I was a member of the soccer team there from 2007 to 2011, and then worked clinically for about a year in some hospitals before coming back into sports nutrition at Purdue. So I am a registered dietitian. I'm a certified specialist in sports dietetics as well. I mentioned I'm at Purdue currently professionally, and also I'm the author of The Healthy Former Athlete, which I'll mention at the end. So I have kind of just a handful, maybe 4 or 5 kind of big points I want to make. I know we have a lot of different sports, I think, on here today. And probably a lot of different situations, maybe some former athletes, some that are still participating, but trying to manage this weirdness of doing everything from home right now. So I'll try to give some general advice, but hopefully if you have specific questions, we can address those at the end, because we should have plenty of time for that. So the first thing I want to talk about is just balancing your plate and what that looks like. And we talk a lot with our athletes at Purdue about fueling their performance, right? And just fueling their bodies in general. And so up to this point, you may have talked about food in regards of like food groups, right? So grains, meat, dairy, fruits, and vegetables. When it comes to sports nutrition, and some of you may be well aware, we usually talk more about macronutrients. So the first one is carbohydrate. And I think carbohydrate probably gets the worst rap because we hear all of the no carb, low sugar, et cetera, in the media right now. But quite simply, carbohydrate is your main energy source. So it provides energy in our diet. And that doesn't mean that we can't be thoughtful about our carbohydrate intake. But one of the most common things I see athletes do is underestimate how much carb they need, because it is our main energy source. And especially if you're in an endurance type sport, I mean, it's 70+% of our energy needs come from carbohydrate actually to fuel that exercise. So I think that's important to remember. And it's our primary source of energy for our brain. Our brain prefers to use glucose, which is a sugar. So just something to think about. We'll talk more about that in a sec. And the other thing I like to point out with carbohydrate is that fruit and vegetables are carbohydrate. Especially fruit, it's like 100% carb, and a lot of vegetables are very high in carbohydrate as well. And so when people tell me, oh, I'm eating healthy, I'm not eating any carbohydrate. my first question is always, okay, are you eating fruits and vegetables? And usually the answer is, well, yeah, of course, those are healthy. And my response is, well, those are carbohydrates. So just something to think about. And the fruits and vegetables in our diet provide a huge amount of the fiber and the vitamins and minerals that we need in our diet. So that's carbohydrate. The second macronutrient is protein. And as athletes, we're usually pretty aware that we need protein. And the reason that we need protein in our diet is definitely to rebuild and repair muscle tissue and a number of other things, but that's kind of the main one that we relate to as athletes. And the protein in our diet, especially from animal sources, provides a huge amount of the iron and the B vitamins in our diet. And as athletes, we need those nutrients for sure. And then the last macronutrient is fat. And fat is essential in some quantities. So we do need fat. And I think sometimes that also gets a bad reputation, right? Like fat is bad. And that's not necessarily true. We definitely need it in our diets, but there are better sources of fat than others. So healthy fats, which some of you may have heard of, are going to be fats that provide omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And so those have heart healthy benefits, brain health benefits, as well as fighting inflammation. And as athletes, we tend to have a lot of inflammation because we put our bodies through a lot of stress. So in a nutshell, that's our macronutrients: carb, protein, and fat. They're all important, but what does that look like when it comes to our diet? So this is a really simple graphic that I use with our athletes a lot. I think it's just a really good way to kind of generally think about our plate. Is we need to balance that approach. So carbohydrate and protein you see there. You'll notice that fat does not get a piece of the plate. And that's because fat, while it is important in some quantities, it tends to work itself into our diet just fine. So, it's found in lots of different foods. We tend to have it kind of make its way in there. So we don't need to usually designate a piece of our plate for fat. So what we give that last piece to is fruits and vegetables. Even though, like I mentioned, they are carbohydrate rich, most of them, they are, pretty low calorie as far as energy balance goes, and they're so important. So carbohydrate coming from grains and starchy vegetables is 1/3, protein is the 2/3, and fruits and vegetables is the last piece there. So I think, just to kind of throw it out there, if you were getting all three of these things on your plate, that's a really good start. You're probably being more purposeful already than a lot of people and a lot of athletes are with building their plate. But then with that said, while thirds is a good kind of starting point, that does not mean that every single person needs exactly thirds of their plate, right? Of course, there's going to be things that make those amounts change. So this kind of basic thirds of our plate, I always think this is a good guesstimate for what you might need. Just for like general training, if you're in a, pretty endurance-based sport, if you're training, moderately hard, like this is kind of that baseline plate to me. But what if you are an endurance athlete who is burning a ton of energy, right? So maybe you're a distance runner, a distance swimmer, a soccer player, even like sports like basketball, volleyball. If you're in a really high training period, any sport that's in a high training period, where you're doing a ton of conditioning, spending a lot of time that day doing moderately intense exercise, you might need even more carbohydrate because, like I said, it's our primary energy source, right? So when our energy needs go up, carbohydrate is usually where we want to adjust first. Okay, so this again would be like high training period, a really endurance-based sport that's at the kind of peak of their training. I'm guessing for most of us right now, this is not the case. Even for our sports who might normally be in a pretty high training load, it might be harder right now because we're limited, right? A lot of us are at home. We don't have access to the same facilities. And it's just hard to stay as active right now as it might be normally. So I think maybe a more realistic plate for a lot of us right now is this one where we have now increased the fruits and veggies on our plate. We still have protein present, we still have carbohydrate present, but you can see they're reduced, right? And so this plate to me, I think it's a good example of maybe definitely like low training volume. So our training is reduced right now. off season, you know, we get a couple of weeks off when we finish the season. This would be a good example of that. Potentially while you're injured and you're reduced a lot in that capacity. What I always preach to my athletes is that there's never a scenario where I would say, okay, just get rid of carbs. Just get rid of protein. Like, we don't need any of that right now. Definitely we can ebb and flow the amounts of what we're putting on our plates, but we never just get rid of one piece of the puzzle because they're all important regardless of our exact situation. They're all important. It's just important to be mindful about how much of the different things that we're putting on our plate based on our situation. So hopefully that gives some idea. So if we build off of that a little bit, I think another kind of step to take. So, you know, step one, okay, do I have a carb, protein, and fruit or vegetable? Check. Then step two might be, okay, am I being mindful about how much of each of those things based on my training load, right? And then the last piece, I think, can be just variety. So, you know, there's all different kinds of carbohydrates, right? We mentioned grains, so like pasta, rice, quinoa, oats, cereal, bread. I mean, all of those things have a really, you know, great nutrition profile that they bring to the table. So if we get a variation of those, that's kind of maximizing our intake from carbohydrate. And I left out starchy vegetables, but potatoes, corn, peas, all really high carbohydrate vegetables that would be great to add in that category. So then protein. I see a lot of athletes get really stuck on the same couple of proteins. They have chicken, maybe salmon, and that's it. Or eggs in the morning. Okay, well, those are really great proteins, but if you think about animal proteins like chicken and turkey are really lean, great protein sources. Beef and pork, however, they're not quite as lean, but they have way more iron. So that's a really nice benefit. When you think about seafood, seafood has some of those heart healthy fats I just talked about, omega-3 fatty acids, peanut butter and nuts and plant sources like beans, legumes, etc. Really great protein sources that are not as high fat and have a lot of fiber. Dairy has a lot of calcium and vitamin D. So hopefully you kind of see that variation and variety in our diet within each category can really help get all the different good stuff that each category has to offer. And then even fruits and veggies, variation or variety is great there too, because if you can get a wide spectrum of colors from your fruits and vegetables, that tends to also mean that you're getting a wide spectrum of vitamins and minerals. So hopefully that expands a little bit on the variety piece and what we could do there. So the last thing I want to say about the balancing your plate idea is just, I recognize right now might be a little bit harder. Maybe it's logistically harder. We're not going to the grocery store as often. Maybe our budget for food is a little bit tighter than usual. Whatever it is, we can still get creative. So within the carbohydrate category, I just wanted to point out some kind of cheap or shelf stable carbohydrate sources, and really carbs are usually pretty cheap. So pasta and rice, oatmeal or grits are all really cheap, last forever in your pantry. Potatoes and sweet potatoes also last pretty well in the pantry if you keep them in a cool, dark place. Things like frozen corn is a good carbohydrate source to keep in the freezer, cereal, bread. And if you're somebody who feels like you don't go through a ton of bread and you don't want it to go bad, you can always keep that in the freezer and pull out a couple pieces at a time. So just a few ideas there. Proteins are usually our most expensive thing in our cart, right? So some cheap and shelf-stable proteins. Eggs, I know they're a little bit limited in some stores right now, but you can also buy the pourable eggs. That can be a good option. Frozen meat for sure can be an easier and cheaper option than fresh. Any kind of dairy is a really good protein source and can be pretty cheap. Beans for sure are a cheap and shelf-stable option. Black beans, kidney beans, even baked beans, things like that. Nuts and peanut butter, and then like canned chicken and tuna can also be great to have on hand right now. And then the last piece, the fruits and veggies, I think are easily the hardest to get enough fresh right now, right? Whether it's just we don't want to spend the money on things that might go bad, or they're just not as available. We're not going to the store as often. So my first thing would be frozen fruits and veggies are actually really comparable to fresh. So they have a very similar nutrient profile actually. And so those can be awesome options right now. So I absolutely recommend getting some frozen fruits and veggies to pull from in the freezer when you run out of fresh. The second thing is canned fruits and veggies. Are they as good as fresh? No, not quite. They've been processed for sure. They've lost a little bit of their nutrition profile, but they're still absolutely better than no fruits and veggies, right? So I think canned fruits and veggies right now can be an awesome way to get those in our diet still and to get that piece of our plate happening. Dried fruit is a really good option as well. And then just some examples of fruits and veggies that tend to last a little bit longer. Going to be things like apples, oranges, pears, and then carrots, celery, and broccoli all tend to hold up a little bit better in the fridge or on your counter than some others. So just a few ideas. I'm sure that I missed some good ones too, but hopefully that's some ideas on what you could use right now if it's a little bit trickier than usual. Okay. Oh, and then I wanted to address supplements. I get this question a lot, like, do I need supplements as an athlete? And usually my answer would be not necessarily. As an athlete, even a really elite athlete, you can get definitely all of the nutrition you need from food. But right now, I think given the circumstances, it could be helpful to have a supplement. So protein powder or protein shakes could be helpful, and whey protein is a really good example of another protein-rich food that's going to sit just fine in your pantry. So if that's a way for you to get protein in your diet, that can absolutely be helpful. And then I don't think it's a bad idea to get a multivitamin right now, just if you do find that you have less variety than usual in your diet, or maybe you just don't have the option to get as many fruits and vegetables as usual. I think a multivitamin is totally fair right now to include. And same with vitamin D. If it's a little bit harder for you to get outside maybe than usual. And actually a lot of our athletes, I recommend they take vitamin D anyways, if they're training indoors a lot. Sometimes I think that's a good addition, usually, not just right now during COVID stuff. So, okay. So the second thing is just about creating a routine and eating frequently. This can go a really long way for athletes right now and just under normal circumstances. So we've talked a lot to our athletes when this first started about let's still create a routine, right? Because I think as athletes, we live in like a very structured environment. So right now can feel super strange. Like, what am I supposed to be doing at any given time? So I recommend taking just a few minutes to still plan out your day. So like, when am I going to go to bed and when am I going to wake up? There should be no good reason to not get enough sleep right now, right? So if I can get that 8-ish hours, great. When do I need to wake up by in the morning? And I'm going to work backwards from there and set my bedtime. When am I going to work out? When am I going to make that happen? I'm going to plan that out in my day. And then when I'm going to have meals and snacks. And I'm going to come back to that. But just taking a moment to write that out amongst your other stuff you have to do that day can really help keep us in a routine and make us stick to that schedule. And then routine right now too, I think personal hygiene is really important. It's easy to sit around in your pajamas all day. Maybe you're not showering as much. You just don't have the need. I really recommend make yourself get up at a reasonable time, take a shower, and then get dressed in real clothes. Maybe not every single day if you don't have stuff to do, but in most cases, like every day, we should be putting on new clean clothes. And that's kind of twofold. One, it actually has been shown to reduce feelings of depression and things like that, just taking a shower, getting dressed, getting ready. And then also right now from a coronavirus standpoint, they have shown that it can live on clothes and in your hair. So personal hygiene can actually be really important just for helping stop the spread. Okay, so this chart is one of my favorites, and I know it might look a little confusing, but I'm going to explain it. So hopefully you can see my mouse too. This first eating pattern says ideal eating pattern, and essentially what we're looking at here is this big thick line is an energy balance. So we've eaten the same amount of calories that we've expended if we're in an energy balance. And up here at the top is our energy surplus, like more energy than we need. Down here is energy deficit, not as much as we need. And so this ideal pattern shows that this person ate, small but frequent meals throughout the day and kind of just wiggled back and forth between that energy surplus and energy deficit. Never spent a ton of time in either zone. And that's ideal. And I'll come back to why. This second energy pattern or eating pattern shows that this person spent most of their day in this surplus, which means they probably, it looks like, had 3 really big meals, right? Or maybe they just like grazed all day long. They just snack all day long. And so they never really spent much time in this deficit zone. And so what that puts us prone for is gaining fat. So if we have just a lot of, 3 really big meals, it can make us prone to overeat. Same thing with if we're grazing all day long. It can make us prone to getting more calories than we realistically need. And so that can make us prone to gaining fat. But this eating pattern number 3 is equally concerning. So this person, you can see, maybe ate a little bit when they woke up, they had another little snack, and then they didn't eat most of the day, right? And so then even they probably, let's say they went 6 to 8 hours or more without eating anything. They skipped lunch, whatever. They got busy, they didn't eat. So even when they did eat some things in that middle area, they didn't even come close to breaking ground and getting back in the surplus. And so the person that spends most of their day in this negative energy balance, this energy deficit, is prone to losing muscle. And actually, it's not written on here, but they can actually be prone to losing muscle and gaining fat, because when we do finally eat again after skipping a meal, our insulin can be over responsive and make us more prone to gaining fat, to kind of be ready for the next time that you don't eat your meals. So hopefully this kind of shows that this eating pattern number 1 really is ideal from a body composition standpoint, and just from like a being pleasant and not hangry, and wanting to be focused and energized for your day. So I definitely recommend that you don't go too long without a meal or a snack. My goal, or my advice, would be probably every 3 to 4 hours, maybe even every 4 to 5 hours right now, while we're a little bit less active. But you absolutely should still be eating frequently. It's super important for, like I said, maintaining energy levels, getting the most out of your workouts, and just from a body composition standpoint, eating frequently and eating kind of those smaller, moderate meals and snacks helps us keep our metabolism up, which can help burn fat, and also helps us maintain muscle mass, which as an athlete, especially right now, is so important, right? We want to maintain as much muscle mass as we can. And even if you're a former athlete listening right now, it's important for us to maintain muscle, right? We're not doing the same stuff we used to. We want to hold on to all the muscle we can as a former athlete. So hopefully that illustrates that point. All right, so then the last couple things that I wanted to touch on are, 1, post-workout. So if you're a competitive athlete at this point, you have likely heard the importance of post-workout. And you've seen people drinking the shakes and the chocolate milk and whatnot. So why is it important? For 1, we want to rehydrate. So we've lost fluid as we've sweated during our workout. We want to refuel. I mentioned that carbohydrate is our energy source, and I always like to reference it or explain it by mentioning a gas tank, right? Carbohydrate is like our gas in our gas tank if our body was a car. So if I've done now a workout for 2, 3 or more hours, I've burned through that fuel, right? So I need to refill my gas tank with carbohydrate. And then lastly, we want protein. So, during our workout, sometimes it feels like we're building muscle during our workout, but what we're actually doing is breaking it down. We're creating a bunch of little rips and tears. We've put our muscle through a lot of stress during a workout. What we do after the workout is how we actually build that muscle back up. So in a nutshell, for our post-workout, we need fluid, carbohydrate, and protein to replace what we've just done. And when do we need it? So I would say if your exercise or workout has been at least an hour of moderately intense exercise, then it warrants post-workout. So, if you're doing like a yoga session, a light jog, stretching, or just a light ball workout if you're a ball sport. There's so many examples, but if it's a light workout and it's an hour or so, maybe that doesn't need a post-workout. But if it's anything over an hour and you really got your heart rate up and you're sweating and it was pretty intense, and for a lot of us, that's most of the workouts we do, it should probably warrant post-workout recovery. And it's important that we get it pretty quickly. So after we finish a workout, our body has this window of about 30 to 45 minutes where we're best able to start this recovery process. That doesn't mean if 45 minutes go by that our body just quits recovering and sorry, you missed your chance. But what it means is that we're most efficient at it in that 30 to 45 minute window. So if you can get something in pretty quickly, I would recommend that. So then how much? If you're saying, okay, well, how much do I need for my workouts? For fluids, it's about 2 to 3 cups per pound lost. So I would say if you're a really heavy sweater and you want to find out like how much fluid do I need after a workout, weigh yourself. Doesn't mean you need to do it all the time, but at least get an idea of one workout. Weigh yourself before and right after wearing the same clothes, and any weight that you lost is going to be fluid. It's just not going to be fat or muscle at that point in an acute setting. It's going to be fluid. So drink 2 to 3 cups per pound that you lost, or if you don't weigh yourself, that's fine. Drink until your thirst is quenched, and then a little bit more, like maybe 1 or 2 cups more. And that usually is a pretty good gauge to get that fluid back. Carbohydrate is about 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you're interested in trying to figure out how much carb do I need. And it's a fair amount. I think people always underestimate how much carbohydrate people really need after a workout. And then protein, on the flip side, I think people overestimate sometimes how much protein they need, but they need about 20 to 30 grams of protein after a workout, regardless of your sport, of your size. It's about that 20 to 30 or so grams. And there's a few examples of what 8 grams of protein looks like to just give you an idea. So my advice would be, if you're thinking like, okay, well, what do I need? And based on my body weight, I think to make it a little bit easier, the first thing would just be to make sure that you get some kind of carb and some kind of protein in pretty quickly after your workout. Already, you're off to a really good start versus trying to like calculate exactly how much we need. If you get some carbohydrate and some protein in and start the process, that's a great step. And then a lot of us will have a meal coming up, not too long after that anyway. And that kind of keeps the process going. So I don't want anyone to stress out about the exact number of grams of carbohydrate they need and things like that. If you get both those things in, you'll be off to a really good start. And these are just some examples. So it can definitely be chocolate milk. What's nice about chocolate milk and recovery shakes is that they are a fluid, right? So they're a fluid and they have carb and protein. So they kind of hit all 3. But it could be a smoothie that you make yourself, or it can be food. It doesn't have to be a shake or a drink of some kind. It could be food that has, meat and bread. That's carb and protein. It could be a protein bar, trail mix, yogurt and granola, oatmeal with fruit and peanut butter, an egg and a banana. The common theme here is that all of these things have carb and they have protein. So that would be my biggest advice. Like I said, if you can get something that has carb and protein, you're off to a really good start, and you'll be way better off in terms of getting that recovery process started. The last thing I'll say about recovery is that especially right now, because our training is probably a little bit reduced, and again, if you're a former athlete that's still active but not to the same level that you were as an athlete, I often find that recovery can usually just be covered by a meal. So if I finish my workout right now, and let's say I'm doing it in the morning, I finish at 11 o'clock, and I know I'm going to go have lunch in another 45 minutes, that's probably just fine to keep, caloric balance going on. We don't want to necessarily overdo it if we haven't done a really intense workout. So it kind of just depends. You can feel out what your schedule looks like. And if you are going to have a meal soon after finishing a workout, then yeah, that's totally fair. If you, however, are finishing your workout and it's going to be 3 hours before you eat dinner, then you should have some kind of post-workout snack. So hopefully that makes sense there. Last thing I wanted to mention is just hydration. Obviously, I think at this point, we probably know hydration is important as athletes. So the reason that it's so important is dehydration is the quickest way to negatively affect your performance. So even if you get off this webinar and you're like, I didn't like that lady, I'm not going to do anything she says, fine. That'll probably catch up to you at some point. You might start to have those nagging injuries from not recovering. You might have fatigue and not play that well because you're not fueling appropriately, whatever it is. But that's going to catch up to you down the road, right, in weeks or months. Hydration is immediate. So if you're not hydrated appropriately, we know that it negatively affects almost every single aspect of performance. And with that said, usually it affects performance negatively before we get to the symptoms like these ones listed here. The cramping, which is unpleasant, of course, fatigue, headache, losing our appetite. So dehydration is definitely important to keep track of and make sure that we don't get to the dehydrated state, because we know it will affect our performance. And so my advice is always to just consistently hydrate. You don't want to show up right before practice or a training session and chug a bunch of water. We're probably not going to feel great. What we need to do is make sure that we're consistently hydrating throughout the day. And people ask all the time, like, well, how much should I have? It's a hard question to answer because it depends on a lot of different things. Men tend to sweat more than women. Bigger bodies tend to sweat more than smaller bodies. Some people are just sweaty. I was a really sweaty athlete. But I had teammates who would have like a single drop and we'd just done the same workout. So some people just sweat a lot more. Your sport, of course, uniform, weather are all things that affect how much you're sweating and how much you need. I do think for heavy sweaters, if you're somebody that's ever, let's say, finished a workout and you notice that like there's the dry, crusty stuff on your skin, or sometimes you can see the white marks and the sweat on your shirt, that's salt. We're literally losing salt as we sweat, and some people lose more than others. So you should probably use a sports drink like Gatorade or another product like that at least. And if that's still not managing hydration, you're still cramping, you still have issues, then you probably want to add even more electrolytes into your hydration routine. Excuse me. Okay, and then, so just a couple kind of general guidelines. We mentioned that 2 to 3 cups of fluid per pound lost. So that's an easy way to kind of assess like how much water do I need after a workout. And we want to make sure that we're choosing good beverages. So water, unsweetened tea or coffee can definitely be part of your hydration routine. I would say for tea and coffee, it just doesn't want to be too much, right? So if it's between 2 to 4 cups a day, that should be fine. Over 4 cups starts to really not be very helpful for hydration, can almost be detrimental. Milk can be a source, definitely with our hydration plan. 100% fruit juice or smoothies that we've made. All of these can be good beverages to include in our hydration routine. Beverages to limit, probably not surprisingly, are going to be things like soda, energy drinks, loaded coffee drinks, so like a lot of cream or sugar or syrups, things that are really sugary like sweet tea, lemonade, fruit punch. These are all just examples, not to say that you can never have these drinks, but they should definitely be limited probably in our diet. And I think I would especially emphasize that right now, just because we are a little bit less active probably, and beverages are usually a really easy way to get calories that don't fill us up. Right. So I think right now is a good time frame to just kind of assess, like, yeah, I mean, you can have those kind of fun beverages, but probably most of our fluid intake should be coming from water or flavored water if you're not like a plain water fan, and some of those other lower calorie beverages right now. And the last piece is, I mentioned if you're a heavy sweater, you should use Gatorade, right? But we should only be using Gatorade or another sports drink for what it's meant for, which is before, during, and after practice. And I would say that to even our athletes and during normal training time. I see athletes that use sports drinks like all day, every day sometimes. They're just drinking Gatorade or Powerade all day long. And that's really not what it's meant for, right? Those have sugar added, they have salt added, which is fine for what they're meant for, which is around exercise. But to just drink them during the day or during, with a meal, there's not a lot of point. And really, it's just kind of making it, just adding sugar and salt to our diet that we don't need in that time frame. And I think this is also true for the former athlete population. We probably don't need those electrolytes at that point and the extra sugar unless we're training really hard. But the reality for most of us is that we're much more casual exercisers once we finish sport. So Gatorade is probably not needed much, if at all, for that population. Okay. So then I'm going to wrap up. The last couple of things were just a few more resources, and I'm sure there's a ton more out there. But in terms of cooking, like, and recipes, Eatright.org has a lot of good information and just some, simple recipes. I think they also have some stuff that's geared towards right now managing COVID. And I think teamusa.org does a really nice job with their nutrition page, and they have a lot of easy recipes and some videos, I believe. So I think those could be a good option if you're looking for more stuff like that. On YouTube, I have a grocery store tour, if that's helpful, if you've had questions about grocery shopping and kind of how to manage that. We do have that on YouTube, and I think that's a nice resource. As well as Pinterest. Boiler Fuel has a Pinterest page that we have a ton of recipes on, and those might also be helpful if you're looking for different categories of recipes, whether it's crock pot recipes, one pan recipes, post-workout, whatever it may be. And then, of course, for former athletes, I'm unsure how many we have on right now, but NCAA.org has a whole page dedicated to this called After the Game. So they have some good resources on that page. And then, of course, I'm biased towards the Healthy Former Athlete, but that's the book I wrote. It's available on Amazon and most other online book outlets like Walmart and Barnes & Noble and so forth. There's also more information on thehealthyformerathlete.com. But essentially, this book I wrote designed for this exact population on how to transition out of sport, mostly from a nutrition and fitness perspective, but also definitely just from kind of a general life perspective, having lived through it and now working with a lot of athletes who make that transition as well. So if that can be a helpful resource, I hope some of you will check it out. There's also some really simple recipes in the book as well. And with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. I did also put Boiler Fuel and Link to Nutrition on there. Those are my social media pages that also will tend to have some good sports nutrition information, recipes, and so forth. So if that's helpful, you guys can check that out as well. And with that, I think we can open it up if people have questions.
Thanks, Lauren. That was really great. Lots of information, and you touched on many great points. I'm going to ask a quick question to you just regarding the crisis that we're going through right now. Do you have any specific recommendation around feeding to boost your immunity, or would you just keep your nutrition the same?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I probably should have mentioned that with the fruits and veggies piece. So from a nutrition perspective, one of the best things you can do for immunity is get plenty of fruits and vegetables in. The reason for that is what helps our immune system is vitamins and minerals for the most part. There's a lot of different vitamins and minerals that play a role in a healthy immune system. So that's for sure the best thing you can do from that perspective is make sure that you have fruits and vegetables present. And if you can get the variety that I mentioned, that's really helpful too. But I do think that's kind of why I mentioned the multivitamin. I think it's a totally fair approach right now to take some kind of multivitamin just to fill in the gaps, because it might be not realistic, like I said, that you're getting this beautiful array of colors and things right now. So if you feel like that's you and you're having trouble with that, I think a multivitamin can be helpful with that because it can support that immune system, like I said. The thing I would say, though, is that what you don't want to do is go down the supplement rabbit hole, because there are so many people trying to take advantage of people right now with COVID going on. And so, I mean, oh my gosh, you name it. There's all kinds of crazy claims out there to boost your immune system and this will help you prevent COVID. If it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. And the thing with supplements is they can be just as scary as they are helpful. And in fact, more often they're a little bit sketchy. So when it comes to mega doses of vitamin C and different vitamins like that, they're not going to do much for you. You're probably either going to pee them out and just have expensive pee, or in some cases you can actually do more harm if you're getting too much of that vitamin or mineral that you can't just excrete like you can vitamin C. So I would proceed really cautiously. And that's why I would say a multivitamin should really be a pretty good ticket to kind of fill in any gaps, but not get more than you need of anything. That's probably the best you can do from an immune standpoint, and to stay super hydrated. Hydration can help from an immune and from a GI standpoint. So kind of just setting yourself up for success doesn't mean you need to go crazy and chug, 3 gallons of water a day. But if you're doing a good job of drinking regularly, that certainly won't hurt either.
Yeah, great. What about you talked a little bit about former athletes and, their transition, and you touched on your book. Right now seems to be like a moment where, a lot of athletes are in transition. And so, is there a recommendation that you have for athletes on how to not put on too much weight or gain weight during this period? Because I think it's probably the most likely scenario where people are exercising way less. How do they adjust their nutrition, keeping in mind those regular eating regimen that they need to have?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a totally fair concern from, if you're an athlete, you don't want to come back to training having put on a lot of weight and be kind of, behind the wheel or whatever, behind the game. So I think one thing would be, like, the first thing I would say is, while it's understandable you don't want to gain a lot of weight, I would also give yourself a little bit of grace. Like, you might not come back with the exact body composition, and that's okay. It can be hard to manage right now, right? If you don't have access to your facilities and you're not eating quite the same, like, give yourself a little wiggle room is my first piece of advice. But with that said, totally fair to not want to get too off track too. So I think one thing would be, like I mentioned, thinking about the plate, and definitely if your training is less right now, you should probably adjust the carbohydrate content because you're just not burning as much. Mm-hmm. So my advice is always, like I mentioned, that fourth of your plate, or another good goal can be like about a cup, which is about the size of your fist for most people, give or take. So if you aim for about a cup or the size of your fist to be from carbohydrate, that's usually a good way to get some, like, you have it, it's there, it's in moderation, but it's not too much. So watching carbohydrate can help. I think watching the calories from beverages can help, which I talked about at the end. And then I think too, just trying to make sure that what we're choosing within each category is a little bit leaner. That doesn't mean that you can't have the fun foods here and there, but if you think about pasta is not a bad food. But if I have pasta with marinara sauce, that's much leaner than pasta with Alfredo sauce. Same thing, like a baked potato is not a bad food. If I have a baked potato and I have a little bit of butter and sour cream on it, great. If I have a baked potato with butter and sour cream and cheese sauce and bacon bits, that's a much higher fat food now. So I think people can be aware, like, when our training is lower, like, we might want to really watch the extra calories that we add from things like high fat sauces, cheesy sauces, or just like cheesy toppings, condiments, mayo, sour cream, not that you can't have that stuff and you want your food to taste good, but if we can limit that stuff right now, that helps not pile on those calories that don't really fill us up. So hopefully that's at least kind of helpful.
Yeah, it is. It makes a lot of sense. And it seems, just simpler is the best. And on that note, we have a lot of more and more athletes, I guess, out there in general population as well, that eat either sort of an alternative way, whether it's vegetarian, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. Do you have specific recommendation for these population, or resources that you can refer them to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from a general recommendation standpoint, I would say a lot of the same stuff applies that I said before, but just the options are going to be a little bit more limited, right? Yeah. So I think, like, I still think all the same stuff applies. Like they should still be eating frequently. They should still make sure that they have carb, protein, fruits and veggies. But if you're limiting a whole, if you have to eliminate a food group for any reason, then that makes it harder, right? So if you're a vegetarian or vegan, your protein options are going to be much more limited. And that's fine. We just have to be really aware that we're still making the protein happen. So it'd probably be especially important for them to not only make sure that they have like plenty of stuff on hand, whatever they can get when they go to the store, but it might also be helpful to like prep ahead a little bit. So if they're making beans, and maybe they're making them from dry beans, which is a much more involved process, make a bunch at a time so that you don't have an excuse to not get that protein on your plate, for instance. So that might help. But as far as resources go, off the top of my head, I mentioned like Eat Right, I think would have some good resources for different dietary limitations. Also more geared towards sport, CPSDA, and I'll say that slower just in case people are writing anything down, but CPSDA is the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association. And they have a lot of really good fact sheets and like infographics and things that would be helpful and would likely have some of those dietary limitations. And the same thing would go for SCAN, which is the Sports and Cardiovascular Nutrition Group. So that's SCAN. If you typed in either of those to Google, their website would pop up, and they both have a lot of those fact sheets, and I'm sure would have like some food lists and things that would be helpful maybe for those populations. So hopefully that's at least a place to start for those groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those were great recommendation, and the idea to follow the same requirement but be a bit more obviously know that you have limited options and be creative within the groups without eliminating anything. I think that's a great recommendation. We went through all of our questions. I wanted to thank you for joining us and taking the time today. And I think this was a really helpful presentation with a lot of valuable information. So wanted to thank you. We will follow up with information on the webinar, the recording, the presentation, as well as your contact information for our viewers. But yeah, thank you, Lauren. That was great. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for everybody else, I just want to let you know that we are conducting a webinar every week with educational information for athletes, current and former. You can go on our website at athletesoul.space/events, and you'll find a list of all the events that we have. So I invite you to check out the website, register for some of the events that you need. And thank you for joining us today, and I'll send out a follow-up with further information. All right, thanks. Thanks, Lauren. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Bye.